Overdrive today, we tell you all about the long-range electric vehicle from BYD, the Atto 3. Find out what makes the 5th generation Grand Cherokee so appealing, and we revisit the season finale of the Indian Racing League from the Hyderabad street circuit. Hello and welcome to Overdrive. I am Soini Dutt. Now, BYD might seem like a new name for the Indian audience, but the brand has been operating in India since 2007. Now, the Atto 3 is the first serious offering in the passenger space, and this SUV is pretty impressive as well.
The Auto Expo is coming back in January 2023. That's a break of 3 years, and that's because waves of the pandemic have been delaying things, creating all sorts of problems. Now, my last memory of any motor show has been the Auto Expo, the 2020 Auto Expo. And I remember the buzzword at that Auto Expo was China, for some good reasons as well. Because you see a lot of Chinese car makers came in with their wares, showed their upcoming vehicles, talked about their India plans. Some of it materialized, some of it didn't. But somewhere in one corner, one little corner, was a very little exhibit for BYD, or Build Your Dreams. You see, unlike a regular LFP battery pack, where you have the cells that are put into a rectangular structure or a rectangular module, much like a brick, and then all these modules or bricks are sort of assembled together to make the battery pack. The Blade pack essentially uses cells that are stacked into, say, slim steel boxes that are about that tall and almost as wide as the width of the car. And then all these plates are sort of stacked together into the floor to make that Blade battery pack.
So this essentially eliminates the need of modules, which in turn means lesser material used, some weight saved, and it's also safer.
Now, if you were to research about these batteries, you would often hear the term nail test. What that essentially means is, if a long nail were to be punctured through an LFP battery module, it would release a lot of hot gases and eventually turn into a fire. The battery fires that we all have been hearing about, talking about, etc. Now, what happens with the blade arrangement is that these cells, if you were to pierce a nail through that, because these cells run cooler, because this arrangement is like, say, a heat sink, the heat dissipation is much quicker, much faster, much better. Also, these cells have a higher starting temperature for an exothermic reaction. Also, they don't release oxygen, so a thermal runaway is literally not possible. So what that means is, the bottom line is that the chances of a battery fire happening with this kind of a setup are next to nil. And that is exactly why this battery pack is such a big deal.
It also saves weight, and since the design creates a sort of a ladder structure, it gives the chassis better rigidity too.
So what that means is that BYD is able to save weight elsewhere in the chassis without really affecting the rigidity of it. What that translates into is that the vehicle feels quite sure-footed when you are making lane changes or taking corners, while at the same time, around tighter switchbacks, it still has a level of agility, it still has a level of ease when maneuvering through tight spaces, etc., and that's a good feeling.
The high-speed stability is quite good, and at city speeds, the Atto 3 feels as good as the other premium IC cars in this price bracket, and that's saying something. The single motor configuration provides brisk performance, and you don't really miss an all-wheel drive or a twin motor setup on this urban crossover.
Now, for those of you who are in the mood for sporty driving, there are the sporty modes as well. I use the word modes because, well, you have multiple. So, for example, the mode switch here on the center console will only make changes to the way the powertrain behaves. So you have Eco, which is sort of a dull response as you would expect. Then you have the Normal, which is ideally suited for city and highway runs. And then you have the Sport mode, which makes it a lot more eager. But this will only make changes to the powertrain response. Now, usually with electric cars, you get paddle shifters behind the wheel, which let you alter different levels of regen. And usually there are at least 3 levels of regen that you can play with or choose from. Here, however, you have one switch on the tunnel console, and that will only let you cycle between 2 modes, standard and high. Now, standard is as natural as it can get, but it still doesn't give you a strong enough regen, especially for the kind of speeds that an electric car can deceptively get onto. So you are still resorting a lot more to the brake pedal every now and then. And on the high, well, it's a bit too jerky. Whether you're driving in the city or on the highway, that high regenerative braking is a bit too jerky. It's a bit too strong for my liking.
The ride quality is supple as long as the road is smooth, which was the case on Chennai's ECR. It tackles ruts and joints pretty well too, but thuds through potholes, though not as harshly as the MG ZS EV, the other EV of Chinese origin that the Atto 3 surpasses on specs, space and size. In fact, the overall comfort of this BYD is quite good, and the seats also play a big role to that effect.
So this is a card that unlocks the car. It's NFC enabled. So all you need to do is tap it on the outside rear view mirror and it unlocks. Now the good part, if I have it in my wallet and if it's a RFID enabled wallet or RFID protected wallet, it will not lock. You will need to take it out, tap it here again, and it locks. Now, if you look at the design, of course, that's the first thing you're going to notice when you get inside this cabin. It just doesn't mimic whatever you see on the outside. It's not conventional. It doesn't have the conventional lines. It isn't boring either. It has a nice, happy, young vibe to it. There's a bit of music inspiration as well. If you especially look at the doors, you have the round speaker and then three strings flowing from it. And also these AC vents that you see right here, well, they are inspired by dumbbells is what BYD says. Now, as far as the screen goes, if you leave it in its vertical orientation, it doesn't really obstruct vision. In fact, the upper edge of the screen is exactly in line with the rim of the lower rim of the windscreen. So it doesn't obstruct your vision in any way. But what does obstruct your vision a little bit are the big headrests that you see at the back, especially when looking through the rear view mirror. The aperture for the rear view is a bit small, but that's me nitpicking. Anyway, coming back to the screen, there are a few other functions that I need to show you. Continuing with the cameras, so when you go into vehicle image, you have a 3D view and it's pretty detailed. In fact, if I were to turn the turn blinkers on right now, even that shows, so it's quite detailed and it's pretty quick. What I also like is the underbody camera. So here with this view, you can get an underbody camera. You can see the car going transparent. So when you're on the move, it's essentially using the feed from the front and the rear cameras to show you what's underneath the car. So maybe if you are driving off the road, or if you're trying to avoid some sort of a hurdle, or trying to avoid maybe a stone or something that's lying on the ground, this is a very good view. So I think it's a very good tool. You do get a lot of light filling into the cabin thanks to the large glass house, the big panoramic roof, which extends all the way to the back. So in terms of the roomy feeling, not a problem at all. I quite like the seats as well. The bolstering of the front seats is quite good. The seating comfort is quite good. And because they sit a little tall, the foot space at the back is actually quite nice. You also get ISOFIX child seat mounts. Interestingly, you get an ISOFIX child seat mount even for the front passenger seat. So if you want to carry your child in the front, that is possible too.
The cabin is secured by 7 airbags. And the list of safety features is quite exhaustive too. The Atto 3 also has a 5-star Euro NCAP rating for a car that is spec similar to ours, which means we get the ADAS safety functions too. While I was busy evaluating all the features and the driving dynamics, my colleague Tuhin went off to Pondicherry, had a Pani Chocola, and put 320 kilometers on the Atto 3 with around 25% state of charge still left in the 60 kWh battery pack. His driving included a mix of highways and Chennai city traffic as well, and an isolated calculation of both these stints hints that a 450 km real-world range is easily achievable. That's an exceptionally good number for a car that looks like a hatchback but is almost the same size of the Hyundai Creta. In fact, it is the largest EV under 40 lakh rupees at the moment.
Well, the BYD brand seems to be on the radar for many of the Indians over the past few years, but with the Atto 3, the rate of interest has just simply grown over time. We'll just have to wait for the sales numbers to see just how well the brand is doing in India. On that note, let's take a very quick break on the show, but coming up on the other side, we'll tell you all about the new Jeep Grand